I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Money Mixology. As always, I'm your host, Jason. I do have a guest with me in studio today, but as normal, I'd like to set the table a little bit and then I'll kick it over to her for an introduction. One of the things that we always talk about on the show is how important it is to have behaviors and habits established as we aim to meet these financial goals. But I thought it'd be important today to take a step back and kind of talk about the actual goals themselves. I think it's one of those assumptions we make when people set up plans, whether it's in finance or any other aspect of their life. We tell people to establish goals, but I'm not sure we do a great job of helping them actually do that, set appropriate goals, goals that are achievable, goals that'll stretch them a little bit, all these things that we want to do. And so I've brought in an expert on this topic for today. As always on my show, I try my best to bring in all the doctors who are a lot smarter than I am. So I'm typically the dumb one in the room, which is helpful. So my guest today is Dr. Rachel Sturm. She's the Associate Dean at the Business School over at Reich Hall. And so Rachel, go ahead and introduce yourself, give us a little of your background.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. I'm excited to be here today. My area of study when I was in a doctoral program is something called organizational behavior. So I pretty much studied the psychology of people in organizations. And specifically, I look at leaders and how they can develop their character over time and how they interact with others. So not only leading the self, but leading others, leading the organization overall, even leading society. So part of that includes how we set goals, how we understand people's motivations towards those goals, and there's just so much more.
And I don't know the technical term, so please help me out. You're also a certified coach with one of the international elite institutions, right?
Yeah, so 3 years ago, I completed my training through IPEC. It's the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. So yes, I'm a certified professional coach. I do have a coaching business where I do have billable clients. I tend to work with women that are considering a mid-career transition.
So there'd be a lot of goal setting there, obviously. That would be one of
Absolutely. Yep.
So where I wanted to start our conversation today, and you and I have talked a lot as colleagues about this kind of thing. I'm a big believer in setting what I would consider like positive based goals, right? So we're talking about goal framing here. And one of the examples that we always use in the finance world is we try to tell people, don't think about what you're retiring from, think about what you're retiring to. Because one of the concerns when people do eventually retire is that they don't really know what to do with themselves. There's that lull because they lost their professional purpose, but that's because they're focusing on what they're retiring from instead of what they're retiring to. So you don't have to speak to that one specifically, but just in general, how do you view goal framing?
Absolutely. So as a scientist, let's take a step back. And
Okay.
first, let's define goal. So we can just go with a very basic, easy definition. It's some sort of desirable result. And I would say the first kind of iteration of understanding the notion of framing actually comes from work that started in the 60s and then published in the 70s. And the work was done by Locke and Latham. Have you heard of their names?
I have not.
Okay, so they were wondering, can you get increased performance from people simply by how you state the goal, not by actually offering an incentive for the goal completion? So they're like, what's a tedious, boring job, or maybe something a little bit difficult? So they decided on the logging industry, something that is very manually taxing, right? You're there with like a chain, right? Or saw, whatever, and like cutting through a log together, and it's dangerous and all of that. So from that industry, they started with, okay, what if we simply had two groups and one group that got the cut as many trees down as you could today,
Mm.
right? That just very generalized goal. The other group got the, okay, cut down 10 trees today.
Okay.
So they started right there with those two groups, and they found that the group that actually had the specific goal tended to have higher performance. They cut down more trees. And then from there, they did many iterations of that where, the manager was present, the manager was not present. What happens when it was 20 trees, when the goal was too difficult, all of that. So that kind of set the framing back in the 70s and 80s to understand a framework that many of us know, SMART goals, right?
Sure.
They need to be specific, measurable, right? All of that, timely. So that was kind of the initial iteration. There was an article that came out in the 90s by Chip Heath, and he was really clever, in my opinion. He took the thinking from Canavan and Tversky and prospect theory, and he said, okay, once you create a goal, once you put that desirable result out there, you automatically split the sphere of outcomes into a domain of gain and a domain of loss.
Okay. Either you make it or you don't make it, essentially.
Correct.
Okay.
And then once you do that, we're always in relationship with something and others. So once you set that goal, you might think it as an absolute, but it suddenly becomes very subjective. And it becomes a psychological reference point that does kind of squirrely things to your behavior.
Okay.
So Let's look at $10. So the joy of gaining $10 or finding $10 on the street compared to the loss and the hurt of losing $10.
Prospect theory. That's pure prospect theory.
Straight
Yep.
up prospect theory.
Yep.
So we know that the loss hurts more than the gain feels good.
Correct.
Now, when we go back to goal setting, once we set the goal, it's not an objective result that we're aiming for. Now we're in this domain of either gain and loss. And depending how close you are to the goal, if you're in the loss domain, that's going to really motivate you. That's going to start creating some risk-seeking behavior. That's going to potentially get you behaving unethical. Versus if you're slightly over the goal, you quickly get demotivated because you already got the goal.
You've already met
right?
the goal. Right.
Right. So from that perspective, framing becomes really important of we need to be mindful, especially as leaders, right? In my area of study, are we setting up people naturally to be in a gain domain or a loss domain by the very result we
We state. Yeah. So I think, one of the reasons that this show is so important to me, and I know you and I have talked about this, is trying to help people understand that the rules around money don't get to be different than the rules in the rest of our life, right? And this is a really good example. This is why I was excited about this sort of topic about goals, because the way we are supposed to properly establish goals in our professional life, personal life, whatever, fitness journey, whatever it is, it's the same methodology we should be using to set goals when it comes to money. You speak about the demotivation when you finally hit certain goals or
Mhm.
whatever the case may be. We see this in finance too, that we set these goals, whatever it may be. You want to have, $15,000 for a down payment on a house or whatever. And people are really super dedicated to that goal in terms of their, spending stays on point. They do all these proper steps to get themselves to the 15 grand. But then like that period of time between now I have enough money to do a down payment on the house and then the time where I actually buy the house, which could take a while as you're looking for one, that kind of stuff. Often they will completely they'll lose the monkey, right? They're
Yeah.
just off spending whatever because like, oh, I hit my goal. I can kind of do whatever I want. And I'm like, whoa, 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 let's set a different goal now.
Yeah, a lot of folks that study motivation, because really when you're looking at progress towards goal, you're understanding someone's motivation
Sure.
towards that desired result. And yeah, they're showing that messy middle and things quickly trail off. So there was this TED talk where she was talking about, I guess, lighting candles for Hanukkah. Like, do you start with, like day one, I think it was to 8, and how people just admit like they start on day 1 and forget about 2 through 7, and then go at
Eight
the
and
end,
oh.
oh, okay, we'll light this again. Yeah, she was joking around like, okay, it's not just 2 days, right? It's, longer than a little bit over weeks. But she said in the middle, people just quickly, go off task, right? It's very easy to do that. Or another way to think about that is other goals start creeping in. Right, you can almost have like goal creep, right?
Yeah.
As you're moving towards, especially if the goal is very large, like, hey, save $1 million before you retire.
Right.
And you got 30 years to figure this out. It's big.
Yeah, I think that goal creep can be really problematic because especially in finance, to your point, like the $1 million for retirement or whatever it is, these numbers are so large. And the thing is, like, if you start with $10 in the bank or whatever, and a few years later, maybe a decade later, you're at 600,000. You've gone so far, you're like, yeah, I kind of got this. Like you just sort of lose the focus because you're
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, I already have most of my goal met. And so it'll be fine. And I think then we start seeing, to your point, people are like, oh, maybe I could try this and try that. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The
Yeah.
plan is working. Stay with the plan. What are we doing here? So I think that's a part of it. And again, sort of going back to my first point when it comes to the framing too, I think that on the show, I often use the sort of health and fitness world as a parallel to the money world because I think there's a lot of similarities there. And it's when people, for example, like if people say, statistically, if they say, I want to lose 50 pounds, and so I cannot eat this, 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 and this, whatever it may be, whatever diet they're following, that is actually most of the time very unsuccessful. They're far better off if they frame it as they want to be healthier in some, whatever the definition of that may be. And if they say, I have this many calories to use per day and I'm able to go out and use them in this way, right? I want to get this much protein. When they frame it as what they want to actually do, as opposed to what they can't do, they're more successful with it.
Right. So 2 things. It's that shift in framing of like, I get to eat what I want within this boundary versus I have to lose or I have to not
Yeah,
eat
I can't
this.
eat anything, right?
Right. It's that have versus get to framing, which is really important. And then there's another piece here I wanted to say around that. Shoot, my mind's going blank on that.
See, this is what happens on live.
Well, now I'm starting to count my calories and I'm starting to think about like food, like, oh, maybe I should have pancakes
Yeah,
today.
I need lunch. What's going on?
Yeah. All right.
Well,
I'll
yeah, I
come
mean,
back to that.
again, I think this is just a matter of helping people understand that when we start talking about setting financial goals, we want to have a mindset. If you look at a budget, right, in a general sense, people tend to view budgets as negative
Mhm.
because they feel like it's a restriction. And actually, just on the last episode I just released, we talked specifically about this, that that's the wrong way to view a budget. A budget is explicitly permission to go buy things you prioritize. And yet, that's not how people frame it. They frame it as, I can't buy everything I've ever wanted my whole life. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess if you look at in that negative context, you won't be very successful with it. So that's where the framing makes a huge difference in terms of how we approach the goal or the process.
Yeah, another piece I got what came back to me is around it's very easy to fall into the trap of selection bias where we just anchor on one side of the continuum and not the other. So, for example, with the weight loss goal, right? If you're just focusing on kind of that negative or the loss side, you're missing the opportunity on the growth side. What you were saying about the health, right? That there's a chance for greater health over here. So I think we do that a lot. And I see that a lot with leaders when they set goals in organizations of, okay, I want to, increase sales here, but they don't think about, okay, then on the other side, what do I have to remove the barrier so I can help people move towards that, right? It's like they tend to just kind of like all stay in the one area of it. We got to do more, we got to do more, we got to do more. But what can you do less of, right? To help you do more of something.
Right.
It's like we
Refocus
can
it.
very easily just kind of anchor to one side more than the other.
Well, and that's where the priorities come into place, right?
Yeah.
At least in my world of budgeting, that it's okay if you want to. And I've mentioned this on the show a few times. Like my wife and I overspend on cars. We acknowledge that. That's okay within the context that we are willing to reduce the other
Yep.
areas. To your point, sort of the barriers in that particular case, terminology wise. I think that those come into play. It's also interesting when we start discussing the goal setting when you have the dichotomy between the positive and the negative. One of the things that I find is challenging for people is we have a tendency to want to live in the negative, right? And,
Mhm.
and and largely because of prospect theory, we're fearing this loss in whatever way we envision that. And so it's very difficult for us. So when I tell somebody to invest
Mm.
20% of their money, they're not viewing it as that's 20% going towards my future. They're viewing it as the pain of taking 20% from me today, right? So they're
Yep.
they're almost viewing it with a negative framework just right off the bat.
We have to understand how our brains have evolved. I mean, the limbic system, your amygdala that processes fear, I mean, that's one of the earliest
Strongest,
system.
right.
The prefrontal cortex, all of that higher order executive thinking where you can understand tenses like past tense, future tense, and everything in between. I mean, that developed later. It makes sense that people naturally default back to a fight or flight kind of fear-based mode of thinking. The brain is actually hardwired to protect us, to look for patterns to ensure we're safe. So then to move someone from safety to flourishing, right? Opportunities in the future, right? No matter, what that may be, pre-retirement, post-retirement. I mean, that takes other tools and techniques because we're not designed to think and be like that.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons that poverty mindset is so destructive because when you are stuck in poverty mindset from a psychological perspective, you are stuck in fight or flight
Yep.
mode all the time, right? You live your whole life in that mode because you're so typically short on, resources. And because of that, it's very, very difficult. I don't like when planners act like people who don't have a lot of money don't want to be wealthy or don't want to set those goals for the future. And I'm like, they're actually mentally incapable of that in the circumstance, the context they're currently in, because they're in fight or flight mode all the time. To your point, that part of the brain will override everything until it is taken care of, right? Until those resources are met. I think that can be just challenging for a lot of people. All right, so we're going to take a real quick break and come back with Dr. Sturm and talk a little bit more. And we're going to get into the way that couples can set goals together. So stay with us. All right, welcome back to Money Mixology. I'm here with Dr. Sturm. She's our goal setting expert. At least that's what I'm going to call you for today. Before the break, we were talking about sort of the framing of the goals. What I want to shift gears a little bit on is even if we want to frame them positively and we want to take that approach to the better goal setting, if you will, there's still the challenge of, at least in the world of finance, that you typically have a couple, right? So a partnership, spouses, whatever, setting goals together. And that adds unique complications because you have two people who may or may not be exactly on the same page with their goal setting or what they're trying to accomplish. So, can you just speak to what challenges they may face? And are there some sort of science and research based techniques for getting a group or a couple of people on the same page for this kind of thing?
Yeah, that's, I think, a $1,000,000 question right there, right? Because if organizations could do that well, I think they would
More
there'd be a lot more
successful?
successful organizations out
Yeah,
there. Yeah, it is very difficult. I mean, one thing you have to be mindful of is, the ecosystem in which the conversation is taking place. And what I mean by that, again, if you're the planner, if you're the leader in the room, it is important to set expectations, what the hopes are in that direction, but then also to acknowledge the boundary conditions. Like, this conversation is not going to be this XYZ.
mm,
Actually saw a really good example of this. Something happened. Where you had a disappointing result at work, and the leader called the team in, and I thought she did a really, really great job of really saying, okay, this is what this conversation is, and this is what it's not. So right there, nips in the bud. Like, if you want to go off on
some tangent of some
tangent or
sort.
you wanna just vent your anger for that's not what this particular, 45 minutes or 60, that's not what this is about. So I think we have to be mindful of that piece of it. Another thing, and I'll just zoom out to organizations and we'll come back to, couples, and I'll provide a coaching perspective. You have to understand, are we really here trying to, in general, are you trying to get people to, agree with the goal that's already been set? So is there a
Sure.
control aspect? Or, so you're creating
You're asking for buy in. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or are you really just wanting them to brainstorm and come up with ideas, right? And you want more flexibility to just hear the great ideas because others have great ideas. So you want to draw that out of them.
Well, and yeah, I mean, that's an incredible point when it comes to couples that I work with a lot is that when I walk into a room or they walk in and I'm trying to work with them, I have to try my best to understand what is happening here. Has one
Mhm.
spouse made a decision and they're asking for buy in from the partner? Or are they genuinely, neither of them have a great idea and they're going to do some collaboration to try to come up with a common goal? Because that's very, very different in terms of what I'm being asked to do and what sort of the framing of the conversation is.
And that's really interesting too, because now with the coaching hat on, as a coach, I hold the client's agenda. So I might have my thoughts of, based on scientific evidence, here's a recommendation, but really that's not my role. I'm not a consultant. So I'd be curious to hear what financial planners kind of where they sit in terms of really truly holding the client's agenda compared to really kind of nudging them and saying like, here are best practices, here are
Hmm.
things you should consider. Because in a true form coaching session, you create the coaching agreement up front with the client. If there's two in the room, a couple, you create that up front of, what does success look like for our time together? How will we know we've been successful in achieving the goal? And then, you work through with my training. I have two more questions that I ask that follow on from kind of that initial setup. We create the goal together. They tell me, right, through my help for the moment for the next 45 minutes. So that looks kind of different,
That's the session goal,
the
right?
session
Gotcha.
goal,
Yeah.
because then the real work happens right when they're not with me, what do they take away from there?
Sure.
But to your point, if you're always holding the client's agenda and there's two clients, they're a couple, financial planning, they might have different agendas.
Sure.
And that's difficult. So I'll ask a question to you. How do you see your role as a financial planner? Are you there to get them to buy in to what you're telling them to do? Or are you there to really kind of create a space to let them explore for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a dead on question. I mean, obviously, you're one of my bosses at the university, so you understand my job is to train
It's
the
a
future.
liberal, that's a liberal
Yeah. Yeah,
understanding.
that's a very broad spectrum,
Yeah.
but my job is to train the future planners, right? I mean, that's what you're asking me to do, and it is a challenge that I have often have discussions with them about how do they see themselves in their role in the future. I personally tend to be a very strong believer in the efficacy of the person, the client, or the person being coached. If if all they're doing is coming to me and I'm giving them every answer, that's not going to work, at least I don't believe going to work long term because that's not what they're bought into. They didn't come up with that. I view my role as, in a more broad macro sense, I will give you the parameters, the guardrails of you shouldn't do these things, right? There's these things out there you should probably avoid to your best ability. And I want you to have some generalized targets. You should have some investment accounts. You should have strong budgeting. You should have some money put away for your kids' college. Like there's some general buckets. But within those, it's on you to decide what you really want to accomplish, right? These have to be your goals, not you accepting goals I've given to you.
Mhm.
I just don't think that's effective long term. But there are many planners who are very much dichotomous to that, that they believe, no, I'm the expert, do what I tell you to do. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I agree with that necessarily because this isn't medical advice. Typically in medical advice, there's a right answer and a wrong answer. In finance, that's not really the case. It's very contextual and it can be different for different people. So I think they should own it.
I love that. So again, I shared at the beginning that the clients I tend to work with are women that are like mid-career and looking for maybe a
Sure.
transition
Yeah.
and either a different role in the organization, right? Or something, or maybe they're going to leave and go into a different industry. And it's incredible, right? They'll come in maybe talking about kind of their day to day at work or kind of some hopes and dreams. You know where it always ends up? We always somehow part of the conversation comes with how their parents perceived money.
Yeah.
And that
Drives a lot of their,
goes
yeah,
directly into their thought process like, "Okay, if I am gonna step away from my job, like, if I'm gonna quit and I have nothing lined up." Well, first, even just getting to that point, what would your parents say about that, right?
right.
Because I'm sure we many of us would say, like, "Well, they would say, 'Don't do that,'"
Don't do
right?
that. Right. Yeah.
And we know. So that's the voice in their head. Now, is that their voice? Is it some conflated voice of how they were raised? Is it wisdom? Is it something else? That's what's a lot of fun about coaching because I'm trained to coach the who of the client and to explore that in the moment with them.
Sure.
Because as long as they have the self-awareness when you think of emotional intelligence, if we can get them to that understanding and being self-aware, knowing that they know the right things for their lives, right? It's
Sure.
their lives. They're the expert on their life. If we get them to self-awareness, then we could start making that shift to also self-management. So those are two facets of emotional intelligence, right? Self-awareness, self-management that are really important that I think would come up often in these kinds of conversations.
That's where, especially when I work with couples, what I want them to understand, this is a big driver behind why I don't believe you should be relying on your planner or stock advisor or financial plan advisor, whatever term you want to give this person. You should not be relying on them to get you better results in your financial plan for a couple of reasons. One, that's very hard to sustain over time. If somebody says, I'm better than the stock market, I can get you an extra 1% a year or something. First of all, that's statistically impossible, but setting that aside, we have efficient markets for a reason. But beyond that, you're giving somebody else the authority and the power over your financial planning. And I don't like that. I would rather the couple work together and figure out some methodology, some plan to, let's say, free up an extra $100 a month or something, whatever it is, and then put that money towards their investment plans. Because then when we get a few years down the road, that improved outcome is entirely based on what they did. They earned that extra money. It's a positive back to them, not just, well, that person I hired kind of did something good for me. That's not sustainable. When you see that you were the result, the driver behind the positive momentum, you tend to want to double down on that. Like, oh, I did something good. I want to keep doing. I want to do even more. And so from our motivation theory, I think that's much more powerful. It also gives the couple a unifying force. Like, we did this together, as opposed to that person we hired over there in the corner did it for us. Because in that case, we're not a team. We just sort of decided to hire this third party. But if we go together and between the two of us, we do something really solid, that brings us together more as well. It ties our bond tighter.
I love that you said the word powerful because before I said we're all in relation to each other. I mean, we're social beings.
Sure.
When we look at those pieces, so we're always trying to figure out the right way to say this. There's always like a hierarchy or power ebbs and flows
Sure.
in conversation.
Yeah.
So you can see that with the couple,
Oh, yeah,
right,
for
in
sure.
terms of power dynamics with them. But then also, again, as your role as the planner or the one leading the session, going back to framing, are you looking to have power over them, which kind of gets you in that control, like I'm
Right.
the expert,
I'm the
I know the
expert.
best,
Right.
it's more of that I thinking, or power to, like I'm here to help them get to these things. And there's that subtle shift where the latter is about empowering the couple as an entity, as a unit,
Mhm.
to decide for themselves with your guidance, right, and your insights. But it's important to really kind of understand the differences between those two.
So specifically, what would be your advice? Let's say you have a couple that comes in, and let's assume the session goals for that day, that meeting is going to be an hour long. They agree on that. We both acknowledge we're here to choose an investment plan, right? Like, they acknowledge they're on the same goal for the session, but their overall goal about what they actually want to accomplish long term on their investments is different. There's some sort of a split there. Is there any advice? Does the research give us any guidance on what they could do or what I could do as a planner to help them get onto the same page? Are there exercises they could go through? Is it where do we start that process of getting them to collaborate and consolidate on a unified goal?
You think of financial planners as business owners, right? So I have a coaching business as a
Sure,
business owner. Part of that to me, you can use kind of that coaching agreement in the day, setting up what does success look like. I think in the initial conversation or even a, initial conversation plus to follow up, you want to get to that understanding too with the couple overall in terms of their finances is what does success look like working together? What does that mean for you? So we call that the coaching contract. So up front, you would clarify those expectations. And it is hard because things come up, right, that
sure.
maybe you didn't know about or you didn't consider. From that perspective, yeah, you'd really want to make sure that upfront there's some clarity. And if it's too different, I think the question would be, do you want to work with that couple? Is that a good fit for you? Do you want to refer out in some capacity? Do you recommend that maybe you work with them separately to kind of move the needle enough and then bring them together? Right? You have a lot of these cool pieces you can play around with.
I have my certified financial therapist side as well. And I think that that last piece you mentioned can be a tool that I have used and I will use on occasion if I have a couple that just cannot seem to establish, and I love the way you said, what does success look like to us? Because financial planners get too hung up on the dollar figures, and human beings do not think in dollar figures at all. That we're not conditioned to do that. We don't understand them very well. They're just digits on a page. What people view financial goals in terms of is what the outcome ends up being, whether it's experiences they get to have, something they get to buy. It's
Yeah.
always these other factors. And so if you can get people to move away from the dollars, because I might think we need 3 million and you might think we need 2 million as a couple and we argue about it, we can't get on the same page. But if we step back and what you're expressing is, I want to be able to travel. And then I say, well, that's what I want too. Well, then the planner can go, well, hold on a second. I can do the math for you and tell you what the actual number you need to travel, all you ever want to travel. Right. So I think it is important that we do step back and help whoever's in the couple, all the partners involved. To your point, what do you define as success? What does successful outcome look like in the real world, not on dollars on a
Right.
page? Because then I can be the expert doing the math for you. That part's pretty easy. So I think that's the piece that I like about what you said. The other part is occasionally I will separate the couple, but that is largely based on if I sense a power imbalance. If you've got one spouse who just is overpowering the entire conversation, all the goal setting, and you can sense that the other partner doesn't have enough say in the process, you're not going to get good buy-in. They might do it under duress, but they're not going to do it with any fidelity and it's just not really fair to them, right? So I think that's where you asked me earlier, how do I view my role? I'm more like a coordinator. I'm just trying to get you both on the same page and create a good plan. And if that means that I have to talk to you separately so I can get true, genuine input from each of you, then I'll do that. I just don't love doing that because then you're clearly identifying that there's a problem, right? You're telling them there's obviously a problem here. And I
Mhm.
don't love sending that signal, but occasionally it is necessary.
Yeah. So when we're talking about emotional intelligence, I mentioned awareness, self-management. The other piece is other awareness and relationship management. So you can actually pick up on those social cues in the moment. Because anytime we're in relation with others, there's going to be those power dynamics in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I mean, I think it's couples are a challenge. It's just like any organization, right? I mean, when you're dealing with multiple people, organizations are multiplied by, 50 or whatever, but it can be a challenge in any case. All right. So we're going to take one last quick break and then we will come back and finish off our conversation. Please stay with us. All right, welcome back. Before we get going, I apologize, Rachel. This cord on my headphones
It's
is
cracking me up.
47 miles long, and I'm like wrapped. I'm gonna end up hanging myself with this thing. Okay, so to sort of finish up our conversation today, we wanted to chat through the different types of goal setting based on some different parameters, mainly based on time horizon. So obviously, in the world of finance, that's one of our key components, right? We've got short-term goals like paying off debt or something. We've got middle term goals like saving up to buy a house. And then we got the long term, obviously retirement or college savings. So in your expertise or the research, what does it tell us about how we should be setting those goals? Is there a difference in the way we should be perceiving them or setting them up or things like that based on how long it is until we have to accomplish the goal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really loved the paper that Heath did looking at prospect theory and goal setting. Because once you have the goal, you're splitting the domain again
Yep.
in terms of gains and loss. And as you move away from the midpoint, right? If you think of like a 4x4 quadrant with the goal at the midpoint. So if you're saving for retirement, you're going to be way on the bottom in the loss domain, right? Because you just haven't gotten there.
Yeah. It's so
Um,
far away. Yeah.
and that's more concave, which means that it goes up sharper in the loss domain, and like I said, that can create risk taking and other things versus in the gain domain, like once you reach the goal, it kind of levels off. But what both of them show though on the tail end of those curves in either domain, there's just again less motivation. So we might say that's the getting started problem. When you have a goal that's really far away or a goal that's really big, and I think with finance you'd have both really big and really far away, especially
Right.
for retirement, people don't even know how to get started.
Right.
So it's too big.
Demotivates in the beginning.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
just I mean, you're almost level as a curve, like, there's no actual, like, projection and momentum, like, you're just kinda, like, flat, saying there's, like, nothing to actually kinda kickstart
Yeah.
that. So that's why it's really important to set, sub-goals and
Okay.
really help people understand, okay, maybe here's the vision that we're moving towards, right, with, like, the leadership hat on, but, like, and then breaking that down into sub-goals as a way to start, just knowing it's difficult for people to get started.
Yeah, I think that's where I try my best as a planner, especially on those like long-term goals, retirement type things. I try to have very clear, simplistic action steps that they can take away from our first meeting or
Yeah.
session or whatever. Hey, this week all I need you to do is just call your bank and get your IRA set up. Don't even worry about anything else. Don't try to put any money in there. Just get the IRA established so we have a place to put the money. Because I agree with you. I think that's the thing. The other part for when you talk about so just for clarification of prospect theory, again, so the audience as a reminder, it basically means we hate losses more than we enjoy gains. And if you think about retirement, it's this way, way, way off goal where the positive will end up being, and yet we're taking all the pain now, which is just contrary to what we want to do naturally. And so I think it's compounded by the fact that your first few years of putting money into your retirement account, you're not really getting anywhere. I mean, at least not comparatively speaking, right? Until
Mhm.
that compound interest can kick in, but that's way down the road. So I do think there are a lot of challenges. What happens or what's some suggestions for the shorter term goal? So if I wanted to pay off my debt, I don't know, in the next year or something, are there strategies I could put in place that would allow me to frame that up in some sort of positive way?
Yeah, this is, taken from, I guess, the improv literature. We'll have some fun with this.
Okay.
But going back to how our brains are designed, we like to be comfortable. You
Yeah,
just ask people,
right.
a lot of people I'd say are actually planning to be comfortable, right? If you wanna
Sure.
even go
That's
that
what I mean,
far.
that's what planning is for, right? To
There's a
take
certain
away the
level of
stress, to
comfort. So to make people uncomfortable, um, is important, especially when it comes to growth and development, and then leading people to maybe a place that is different for them. And I think that's for a lot of in planning, we need to do that. So they did a study with folks doing improv where, and it's just a simple framing. So again, just a shift in the way we perceive or think about something. One group is like just to stay comfortable to who you are and try these activities. The other group was, okay, get uncomfortable. Like it's okay to be uncomfortable. Do different things, like get out of that space, right? And they were given permission to be able
do that.
to be that, yeah, do that and be that way. And they found that the group that was allowed to be uncomfortable actually had more focus and they stayed in character longer than the control group. That was the natural default state.
That's interesting because I had not thought of this beforehand, but the way that you framed that up or laid out that sort of scenario, I often tell people if they're going to do a short term like debt payoff type thing, and in this one instance only, I will give credit to the Debt Crusader radio show that everybody knows I'm not a fan of. But one of the things that he does do well that I think ties in exactly what you're saying, he specifically advises people to be very uncomfortable with that initial stage of like really aggressively paying off the debt to where it's painful. And in some ways, that kind of makes sense versus what you're saying, because if I'm uncomfortable with it, acknowledging that I'm doing something different, right? Like
Mhm.
you're in your own brain, you're saying "Hey, this must be a new me that's coming because I'm forcing myself to be really uncomfortable. Like nobody wants to eat ramen noodles for a year. But if you can do that, then you're headed towards this like really impactful goal in the short term. The difference is you can't be uncomfortable forever, right?
Right.
And I think that's where I get a little frustrated with the Debt Crusader is that at some point that effect will wear off, right? You can only do
Mhm.
that caffeine for so long and then it just stops being effective.
Right, and I think, it's important to have a match with your clients and to understand some might be more okay with being aggressively uncomfortable, others, not so much. So I think that goes back to the EQ and understanding how do we move the needle enough with this individual or the couple so it's not, it's not too much, but it also challenges them enough. You want to make sure you really are, challenging them, especially when you're thinking about paying off debt.
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, if you're trying to do debt payoff aggressively, I actually don't recommend that people automate that. I want them to feel the pain of that,
Oh,
right? So you
interesting.
don't go
Yeah.
back into debt. I want you to experience when you have to make that third credit card payment for this month, right? Because you're trying to pay it off,
Mhm.
really aggressively. I want that to be painful because I want you to like internalize, stop doing this, right? Stop buying things you can't afford. Like, let's not do this again. But on the long term, I don't want them to burn out, right?
Mhm.
If I'm telling you to put 20% of your paycheck away for retirement, that kind of stinks. Like, you're giving up 20% of your pay. That's painful. I don't want you to experience that pain every week because then it will start to wear on you. So automate that because it takes it off your plate and it removes that discomfort from at least from your line of sight, if you will. So does my advice jive with research?
Yeah, another piece here to explore is the financial habits you're cultivating with your client individuals. So it takes about 21 days to create a new habit. It doesn't mean it's going to stay and persist, but it does take time. So when you have like a new thought, right? Or if someone is constantly thinking, okay, I can't do this, I can't do this, or they hear their mom or dad from growing up in their head, to have them have an aha moment where they consider something different, right? Hey, it's okay to be uncomfortable in this situation. Let's role play. Let's have some fun today and let's try this out, right? And just
Sure.
see. So once they have that new thought and it's not down that well-wrought pathway, like when your neurons are firing, it's like a pathway
Sure.
that's well-worn, right? And there's lots of dirt now, right? There's no more grass because you just walked it so many times. Once they're in a new neurological pathway, a protein forms on the neuron. So it actually takes up mental real estate. Now they're kind of in this space. And then to create habits for the next 21 days where you encourage them to kind of start walking that pathway, it's just enough. That's good. And then you need another 21 days to kind of keep them
So
moving.
doing it in 3-week blocks kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kinda keep them moving, think about, like, 2 months, trying to keep them going down there because, again, it's really tempting, like, well, that pathway is just dirt, it's really easy to walk through, right? There's still has some grass, I'm cutting my legs and, all of that. So, that's just another way to think about this is try to get them into habits of being that would support financial, independence and excellence and things like that.
I mean, I guess that makes sense given the fact that when people first start out, we typically talk about a month budget. I personally would love to see people, and I encourage my clients to get to where they do a year of cash budgeting. So, weekly cash balance budgeting for a year out at all times, like a rolling year
Mm.
out, basically, so that they know exactly what their account balances are going to be at any time over the next year. So they have some forward thought. However, I get that that's very overwhelming for people when they first start, and so I ask them, "Hey, let's just do 1 month," right?
Yeah.
Like, let's just get and so it's a little more than 21 days, 28 or 30 or whatever it may be, but it's close, and I think it's that idea of let's just establish a positive habit. You might not have it perfect, and we can try again next month, but let's just get a habit formed that's in the right direction, and I think that sort of speaks to what you're talking about there.
Right, and with that, if you know James Clear, Atomic Habits,
Sure.
I think of, like, habit stacking. There's lots of techniques and tools where it gets people to be uncomfortable, but it's not again, it's not over the top where they just get stalled and paralyzed when it's too much
Too
or too
much.
soon. So again, we're just trying to help them start moving the needles. Stacking something with budgeting with something they naturally do throughout the week or every day, or align those thoughts for them. That could be really helpful just to again keep them walking
Yes.
down that new path.
I forget the author on this, but change theory, essentially,
Yep.
it was a famous research thing that was done in the 90s, but it is the James Clear Atomic Habits thing. He has the keystone habit, and so actually in my first book that came out now 6 years ago or whatever, it's one of the things I mentioned is having a keystone habit, which is essentially to your point, like there's the stacking of habits, but there's the first one that starts the process. For example, like in my daily life, just nothing to do with money at all, I always start my day with my daily planner, just making my checklist of things to do. Does it actually make me any more effective? Maybe or maybe not, but what it does do is prime my brain that now it's time to work.
Mm.
And so it's that keystone habit that starts the day. We try to establish that with any financial planning client as well, that if you're going to do this month's budget, let's just say, for example, what's the one like triggering event? Like, I don't know what that may be. Maybe it's dinner with your spouse
Yeah.
on the first Sunday of the month, right? Or something. You establish a one singular habit that if they do that, it will begin sort of the domino effect of that habit stacking. And so that keystone habit is something we always try to establish, or I try to establish with my clients because it is a behavioral thing. And to your point, these well-worn paths are problematic only until you're doing a good thing. And then
Mhm.
it's like, no,
Oh, yeah, no,
right? Yeah, right on that,
yeah.
pave that path. I mean, I think that comes into play. Have are there any other sort of piece of advice on just general goal setting in our last few minutes here? Whatever you have your expertise in.
Well, this always stood out to me. I watched a TED Talk years ago around, around goal setting and other things. I was curious with something I was teaching, and it was incredible. It was about weight loss, and it found that participants that had a higher BMI compared to a lower BMI, they saw the distance they had to walk as being psychologically further than the other group, the control group or the group that had the lower BMI.
Okay,
And that says so much about who we are as individuals and how much our perception of reality really is a perception. I mean,
for sure.
it's psychological, right? When we go back to is it subjective, objective, and the fact that someone, right, with a higher BMI can naturally see walking a mile as being psychologically further than someone has a lower BMI. I mean, that just I feel like kind of tells you all there needs to be
Well,
understood of like how to connect with people in the moment that they're bringing in already a
these
lens.
preconceived things, yeah.
Yeah.
That I think a good example of that I have found in my experience is I can talk to 2 students here at the campus. They might both be 19 years old. They both might have 10 cents in their bank account because they're college students. But if one comes from a background of any money at all, even middle class, whatever, and one comes from a poverty based background, there is a very real psychological difference. The one that comes from the poverty background views $1 million as way farther away in whatever context you want to say that
Mm.
versus the person who came from a little bit of money, even though in a very pure technical sense, they're in the exact same starting point, right? They both have 10 cents. That is an interesting dynamic that when we try to set goals as planners, or as if you're the listener out there trying to set goals, you have to be very mindful of your starting point, right? That
Mhm.
reference point.
Yeah.
Where am I beginning this from? Not just technically, like the actual dollars, but also just psychologically. How am I viewing this entire problem? Am I coming from a deficit mindset that I have to first address before I can start
Right.
setting these goals?
That's a really great point. I think a lot of times, especially when you're a trained expert, or you have the CFP, right? You have these credentials to your name. It's easy just to jump into task mode, and I see it all the time with leaders, right? You have the task oriented behaviors, but then you also have the relationship oriented behaviors that really matter.
Mhm.
And I think in these roles, it's so important to build that relationship so you really understand who you're working with, and yeah, kind of their psychological framing coming in, and that just takes time, conversation.
Yeah.
Listening to a show like this
Well,
takes
it's hard. I acknowledge for financial planners, one of the challenges is they don't make money doing that.
Mhm,
And I'm not trying to excuse them. I'm not trying to sort of flipping it away. But when you're a planner, you're typically paid for the technical side, right? Like I help you create a plan, I help you do your investments, I get paid. I don't get paid to have you and your husband talk about why you're fighting last night. So that's what a therapist does. And
yeah,
so but the reality is that if we don't have that discussion, or I should say the 2 partners don't have that discussion, we're never gonna get to the planning side
mhm,
because they can't even get their brain into that space to set some goals if they can't if there's these other parameters going on in their life, there's other context. So any final comments before we sign off for today?
I mean, the last one is, you get to choose the kind of planner you wanna be, right, and the kind of reputation you wanna create for yourself, so I would encourage folks to, aim high with that.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you stopping in today. It was a great show. Goal setting is super important. Everyone have a wonderful week. We'll be back again next Saturday at 10 a.m. with another guest. I appreciate it. Everybody enjoy.